I tried to write about the lyrics of various rappers for my English final exam, but I didn't do very well at Cambridge.
What?
They weren't
Your
up for that.
final exam in
Yeah,
English
it
was
didn't
on
do
rappers.
for,
That
for
is exactly what I mean.
Welcome to The View from 22. I'm Cindy Yu, the Spectator's assistant editor. Now, amongst all the freebies that the Labour peer Wahid Ali has given to the Labour Party and various senior figures in it are Taylor Swift concert tickets. Keir Starmer has taken them and taken his wife, as has the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson. And when asked about this, Phillipson said that they were hard to turn down. Is all of this just a little bit teenage? That's the argument that the writer Zoe Strimpel makes on Spectator Life this week, saying that middle-aged people shouldn't really be happy or proud that they enjoy Taylor Swift. She joins me on Spectator TV now, along with Rod Liddle, our columnist, who also is our pop music reviewer. Zoe and Rod, welcome back on Spectator TV. Now, Zoe, you've written for The Spectator this week about what grates you about this Labour freebies row. And it's not the designer clothes, but the concert tickets. Tell us about it.
I mean, to be fair, the designer clothes irritate me as well, but the concert tickets irritate me even more and on perhaps deeper levels. So, firstly, given that I'm aware as a point of fact that a lot of young women/girls love Taylor Swift with a consuming passion that goes beyond your normal, pop fan. Therefore, did Lady Victoria Starmer need that ticket? Or was there perhaps someone that you could argue it would have made their life who was maybe a little more deserving, like a poor 17-year-old or 16-year-old who would never be able to go otherwise? That's the kind of virtuous part of my objection. Then there's a more kind of cultural one, which is, what is she doing? What are all of these middle-aged women who are mothers and really well-to-do doing, performing their adoration of Taylor Swift? Taylor Swift is a pop star that appeals a lot to teenagers because of its themes of, I hate my best friend, that boy did this horrible thing to me. Not just teenagers, obviously Swifties are many more ages than that, but it should be mostly for the young women for whom those sorts of schoolyard and like friend dramas are still on their minds. And I'm not dissing that, because I've also, we all get worked up about friends and boys. But I don't understand why you've got this slew of like the Emily Maitlisses and the Victoria Starmers and all of them kind of going and being like, look at me at Taylor Swift. I'm so I'm so humble, authentic, down with the kids. Like, also the problem, with that, why do I object to that? If it was like musically the most amazing creative stuff ever, and who cared about the lyrics, fine. But I have tried so hard to understand what is amazing, so amazing and entrancing about Taylor Swift that it commands these like terrifying armies of Swifties. And I cannot understand how she's dramatically different from like Miley Cyrus or any of the other ones that,
She's not as good as Miley Cyrus.
Over to you, Rod.
Well, I think Zoe's piece needs to be written, and it's absolutely right. And it wasn't just Mrs. Starmer; it was half the cabinet were there. Half the cabinet were going along to watch Taylor Swift, just as half of middle-class England, in their 40 to 50-year-olds, go along to Glasgow. Not Glastonbury, Glasgow, every year, and leave a mess behind and start cheering for Jeremy Corbyn and listening to music which is vacuous, particularly in the case of Taylor Swift. I mean, it's disposable Kardashian pop music. It has no great authenticity. There is no great meaning to be discerned from its lyrics. It is exactly as Zoe described it. And, I wouldn't mind having read all these pieces by middle-class, middle-aged mums who are bopping along with Taylor at some gig. I wouldn't mind if it was kind of like in the 70s, when dads or mums would be forced to take their offspring to see the Bay City Rollers or David Cassidy, or later, someone like Hanson or the Backstreet Kids. At least in those days, the parents went under sufferance. It seems to be that these people desperately like Taylor Swift, and it's vacuous, and it is. It sounds intellectually snobbish and culturally snobbish, but in which case, fine, let's be it. It is lowbrow culture, and I would prefer to see our cabinet doing something a bit more interesting.
Well,
with
I
the
mean, one used to see Theresa May at the proms or at Schubert, and you know, that was a kind of, now that feels like that belongs to quite a different era. I suppose I it's not so much that I perhaps, you know, I also have sort of highbrow taste, but I also have very lowbrow taste, and it's, to me, the problem isn't really with, you know, glitzy mothers in their 50s, you know, showing the world how much they love Taylor Swift's music, if they really do. But the thing is, so much of it seems to be about this kind of relationship with their children that is
yes,
just
with their mates.
their mates, but yeah, and the children. So what? Why? I mean, I always grew up assuming that you really wouldn't want to go to a rock concert of any kind with your parents. And this is obviously
Yeah.
not a rock concert, but it seems to be that the parents are going almost to try to be cool with their kids,
Yeah.
which is not
Yeah.
the newest thing ever, but it's just a bit cringe. And then
It is totally cringe. You're absolutely right, and it's the wrong way to bring up kids. You know, I'm lucky. My daughter quite likes My Chemical Romance, so it's okay for me to listen to a couple of songs there. But no, you're absolutely right. But it's partly that thing where the parents have ceased to be parents and have ceased to kind of direct their children and be in this position of authority on them, over them, and instead wish to be their best mates. And a similar thing has happened, I'm afraid, with teachers. You know, it's pretty much the same in our schools these days. They wish to be friends with the kids who are queuing up to be in the well-being centre of their school, with their 45 pastoral advisors telling them that their breakup with Susie was very upsetting and they should go home for 3 days. It's an infantile way of bringing up children. And the other side of it, of course, is it's also more of this kidult stuff. So, such as, you know, when I got on a plane a few weeks ago to fly out on holiday to Croatia, I was the only man who was dressed as an adult. You know, I had proper shoes on. You know, they were nice shoes
As opposed to
and
what, Rod?
long trousers. You know, and I didn't have a T-shirt with the name of a band on it at the age of 55. You know, it's just, so there is an embracing of kidult culture and this kind of refusal to discriminate and to say, well, actually, that's quite good fun for you kids, but it's not really for me. It's a refusal to discriminate.
Rod, I'm surprised to hear you come out so strongly against the lowbrow, considering you do moonlight as our pop music reviewer. I mean, do you hate that role? Do you like pop
Yes.
music?
Yes, it's a misery every week. Every week. No, I think rock and pop music's interesting and fascinating from a cultural perspective. But quite clearly, at some point towards the end of the 1960s and into the 70s, it wished to become adult, and it started being very, very pretentious indeed. But even though it tried to do that, it couldn't do that. It was just like a 13-year-old trying to make head or tail of Proust. It didn't work. So you had things like Yes making double albums called Tales from Topographic Oceans, which had been provoked simply by John Anderson, the singer, seeing something on the back of a cereal packet about Indian religion and deciding to make a double album of nonsense about it. And the critics all fawned over it and said, this is wonderful, isn't it? And it's been ever since then that rock music has had a vastly elevated sense of its own importance. And I say that even as someone who still likes a bit of, you know, lowbrow rock music from time to time. It's just taken on the appurtenances of high culture when really it isn't really high culture at all. The apotheosis of that, the epitome of that, of course, is Bob Dylan winning the Nobel Prize.
See, I tend to think that some, you know, pop culture or is kind of worth the time and has
Sure.
pretentious potential, like grime and rap. Bits of it, the bits I know. I'm not going to claim to be a huge expert. In fact, I discovered Nines, who's I think he's classified as grime. He's a Harlesden rapper. I discovered him on British Airways Best of British Sound. So I'm not claiming to be down, that cool. But some of it's really, really interesting. I tried to write about the lyrics of various rappers for my English final exam, but I didn't do very well at Cambridge.
What?
They weren't
Your
up for that.
final exam in
Yeah,
English
it
was
didn't
on
do.
rappers. That is exactly what I mean.
But Rod, you'll be pleased to know, back in 2004, it didn't go down. I was told I should have been sticking to the English moralists of this, so it didn't work at that point. But I think there's mileage there, whereas I don't think I've really tried to get the mileage from it would be one thing if the music was kind of intoxicating of Taylor Swift, but personally, of course, it's a matter of taste. I find it very algorithmic. I don't find it
Yes, it
in
is.
the way that, compared to the Beatles, which is obviously the most obvious possible thing you can compare, but it's like a different paradigm of superficiality compared to that. And then the lyrics themselves, as I said, they're all on these sort of similar themes about anger with, it's all social. It doesn't really get beyond that into anything more interesting. And there's no, huge, I do think rap of various kinds has more interesting subversive kind of rhyming and lyricism. So I back to this thing about what is it that, it'd be one thing if certain crazes I don't understand, but I can see that they're clever or there's something there. This craze to have our most like important grown-ups kind of falling over themselves, as you say, it's like a misplaced reverence that is ultimately completely vacuous.
That's exactly right. Rap. I'm not sure there's been much that was brilliant with rap since NWA, if I'm absolutely honest, which is a long time ago now. Cypress Hill can still be interesting, and some of the new grime stuff is a little bit interesting, but I still wouldn't elevate it to the level of poetry.
I remember you writing a grudgingly positive review of Taylor Swift a few years ago. I think it was Folklore, that you actually liked it.
She did a country album, and she's a country artist, and it was just better than the previous stuff. I ought to mention that before writing that, I had a cease and desist order from Taylor Swift's lawyers saying I had to be nice about her in future and stop writing nasty things.
Okay, I'm going
So
to
that's
assume that's a
probably influenced it a bit. I mean, I think she's awful, but not noticeably more awful than most of her contemporaries. And there are differences between them. I think there is some merit in Lana Del Rey. I can see that she is able to craft an interesting tune which has about it both difference and familiarity, and that the lyrics aren't the usual braggadocio which accompanies both rap and indeed, this strong woman stuff, which is fine in isolation, but when it is nothing but that, becomes just this boring mantra. But Taylor Swift, much as with Zoe, I just don't get it at all. And I shouldn't get it because I'm not 12.
You definitely shouldn't get it. I don't think all these people going around saying they get it with their kids should be getting it either or liking it. That said, I am so burned by the insane fan culture that we have out there now and the abuse that one gets for saying anything about these icons that have these armies defending them. So to be fair to Taylor Swift herself, I mean, not that if a Swiftie is listening to this by now, we're both already dead meat probably. But I mean, she does seem like quite a nice person. She does seem to maybe that's something that matters these days. I think it probably does. There's a sort of wholesomeness there that seems to appeal to people, and that's actually better than her being like a hideous. I'm glad she's not super politicized. That's one of the most insufferable aspects of pop culture.
She's a bit politicized.
She's a bit politicized. She's not as overtly as, say, Beyonce, who, by the way, I went to a Beyonce show, and I have to say it was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen.
Good album, that last one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love it, but the show was amazing. Is it good that her fans, who are of all sizes and shapes, feel emboldened to dress up in sequins and stroll the streets? One could argue that is a good thing. One could argue it's a sad thing. But I think, just to give credit where it's due, she seems like a nice gal.
But I see nothing wrong in 12, 13-year-old kids being mad for Taylor Swift. That's perfectly reasonable. It's just when it bleeds over into their parents, into their benighted parents.
And when it bleeds into a fan culture that very quickly leads to genuinely terrifying levels of harassment. That's the other thing.
Yes, yes. Though we did have some of that with the Beatles. You know, we did have Jane Asher being threatened with death if she went anywhere near Paul McCartney and all that sort of thing.
Mm.
And we had it a bit with David Cassidy back in the early 70s, and there have been other people. So there is a fanaticism with it, and it's a fanaticism which comes with being young and without a fully developed brain, you know, which people at the age of 12 and 13 are. And so I don't have a great problem with it. It bores me when I hear it on the radio. But then there are things from the 80s, 90s, 70s, wherever that bore me as well. But it's what you said in your first answer, I think, Zoe, this desperation on the part of the adults to show that they're down with their kids and mates with them rather than being in a position of responsibility over them.
Sorry to interrupt the show, but if you enjoy what we do here at Spectator TV, then why not subscribe to the magazine as well? If you subscribe today, you get 12 weeks for just £12, plus a free £20 John Lewis and Waitrose gift card. You can sign up at spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
I mean, it's what you said about teachers, Rod. I mean, the natural order of things. I mean, okay, I personally don't particularly like coercing children and stuff. But you know, I prefer to see them as people, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that this idea that you're friends with your parents and that but even worse, I think, is friends with teachers instead of, there should be some disrespect, you know, there should be mutual disrespect. I can't remember a single, I can't imagine taking seriously anything a teacher said. By definition, they were a teacher, so they were to be laughed at, let alone them putting in sort of meaningful things about my personal life or my feelings. And so this is a continuation. I mean, it would have been cringingly embarrassing for a parent to have the same tastes as your parent in public. I mean, it's cute, but it would have been cringingly embarrassing. And that was an important part of the growing up process, to differentiate.
Exactly.
And now but also the whip hand, the kids are sort of control. I mean, there's interesting stuff about inheritance in the bank of mom and dad and stuff, and how now actually children have to be best buddies with their parents because the parents are going to give them all the money they're going to have in the future, basically, instead of their work. But then this is a strange inversion of that, where the parent is kind of, even though they're going to end up giving the child their entire kind of livelihood, they're also kind of desperate to be in with the child at the same time. So it's a mass infantilization, as you said, Rod.
Well, it's also sad for the kids, as it would have been for us. You know, growing up in the 1970s, you had to seek out esoteric rock music. It was hidden. And certainly, if I ever played any of it, which I did from time to time, because they would hear it accidentally from the record player, they would say that's an appalling noise, and it would have been to them because it was out of their context. I don't think kids today, certainly not when it comes to popular music, have that exclusivity, which is a shame. They don't have anything which they can call their own. And, you know, if you're taking your kids to a Taylor Swift concert, that's kind of QED. It's not their own anymore, you know. And there was something rather wonderful about, obviously, the faux rebellion of rock music, which as an adolescent was very, very attractive. And I don't think that exists anymore. Even the most experimental and interesting artists these days are so beautifully, smoothly produced and parrot out the same left liberal shibboleths about cultural issues. There is no difference there. There's nothing for kids to get a hold on and say, well, this is different, and this is what I want to be listening to. They just don't have that anymore.
And in fact, if anything, it kind of reminds me of the pastoral officers at schools you're talking about. When you listen to Taylor Swift and others, not just her, but when you listen to the way these women sing about friendships and kind of falling out with friends, it's a very hostile kind of way of thinking about things. Like, you know, the song Bad Blood, like now we have bad blood, we've got a problem. I mean, I'm not going to try to remember it, but that's one of her major hits. And it's all about sort of like, it's just this kind of it's hostile. It doesn't teach a vision of human relationships where like maybe there's life beyond the friendship, or maybe like, okay, maybe you could talk about it. It's because if you are going to follow your pop idol as a kind of emotional guru, you'd hope you weren't just learning to be like, talk to the hand, like you've you've done this, so now we can't be friends anymore. It's a sort of it reminds me of a sort of hostility that I see throughout all of the kind of discourse at the moment, partly grown up, I suppose social media has generated it. But I don't know, I find her harsh, actually.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And then there's the other raft of songwriters who, particularly almost exclusively female songwriters, who are the people hanging themselves in their bedrooms, whether it be, Billie Eilish, Clairo, to a degree, Lana Del Rey, of course, who was the first, and Fiona Apple, who were the first to kind of do that kind of slumbered vocals and songs about how it's not worth living anymore, which again, we had it as kids, we had Leonard Cohen, so it's very hard to argue that that's a new thing, but I just don't think that they have on offer the kind of radicalism and free thinking which has accompanied youthful music in the past. And I agree with you entirely about Taylor Swift.
I think back, like I remember Ace of Base was kind of, and then the Spice Girls. Those are like two examples of very big global girl bands that I was completely jumped on every bandwagon about. And I'm trying to think why was there something so delicious? Ace of Base is really quite simple, but they were it was so good. And I've re-listened and it's not so good, but I'm trying to, what is the comparison?
It's somewhat of its time, isn't it?
Yeah, but they didn't tell you about being they didn't go into detail about friend spats, or it was, I don't know, it was of its time. But then you think I'm just thinking of my childhood and the Cardigans or the Cranberries and Sublime and Alanis Morissette and people like that, and these are all very obvious people because I never had a niche interest in music like that, but even so, I don't know why there was something more fiery and interesting about them.
Yes,
But maybe that's just me saying that because I grew up then. And
no, there was something more fiery and interesting about them, even if Alanis Morissette never really understood the meaning of the word irony.
I know, she ruined it forever. I still think about that. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that's happened since then is the commercialization of music. Taylor Swift tickets are like hundreds of pounds. As a 12-year-old, you can't go by yourself. It's just impossible. You have to suck up to mum and dad and beg them to take you. And mum and dad are delighted. So I think that makes sense in that sense. The gigs of yesteryear, you can't afford them anymore.
Well, it's also partly true that the means by which recording artists make their money is these days by live performance rather than by publishing royalties, which are obviously slumped as a consequence of online streaming. So obviously there's going to be a primacy on the prices for things like going to see Taylor Swift. So that's changed. And the other thing that's changed, of course, is that it's kind of far easier. Certainly when I think about when I was a kid and in a band, it's far easier to be in a band and to release a single and to get it hyped than it ever was, because it's all there at the flick of a switch in your bedroom. You can do it in the bedroom, immediately. Clairo is a perfect example of that. So it has changed, and perhaps it's finished. It's as David Bowie once said back in the 80s, I think it was, that rock and roll was an old whore and had sort of breathed its last. And punk was trying to suggest that. Van Morrison said the same thing. There's no great reason why there should be this big divide between in musical taste, in terms that rock and roll burst upon the scene in 1952-53. And prior to that, there was no rebellion amongst young people culturally over stuff like music. And you might argue, I suppose, that rock and roll has run its course and that there's nothing really there to replace it anymore.
Interesting. Rod, Zoe, before I let you go, you guys must have guilty pleasures, things that you'd be embarrassed that you like, that you would be embarrassed for people to know that you like.
Yeah, no, I can remember being 25, 26, and I was into all the most esoteric and fashionable music that you could find. And I was in a second-hand record shop, and I found the 40 greatest hits of Status Quo lurking, and I bought it. And I actually went back to I shared a house with other miscreants, and I actually locked the door so that no one would be able to hear me put on Status Quo's greatest hits on headphones. And it was a wonderful hour and a half. It was like picking your nose and not worrying about being seen doing it. It was very pleasurable.
Well, I've never tried to hide my lowbrow, taste. As I said, even Ace of Base is fairly embarrassing, and the Spice Girls to kind of have really gone for them. But what I'm more embarrassed about my pretentiousness. So I'll listen to, often I will make myself listen to the UK top 50 chart thinking I need to be across the culture. And most of it is so awful that it's not like it. I listen to it thinking, I wish this was my guilty pleasure. And I just loved, whoever was number one. And most of them, I just can't bear it. And I force myself to get through it. I suppose the other slight unfortunate thing is that I find myself, I've gone through phases of really liking incredibly misogynistic passages in rap, like this skinny white rapper H, he's absurd. He's very, very mainstream, nothing niche there, but he'll rap about the size of various ladies' behinds, and I'm kind of finding myself kind of enjoying that, or Dave doing the same, or I don't know. So in a way, my taste doesn't seem to conform to what I think is seemly or unseemly, and I have a pretentiousness that I seem to not be able to quite put to bed yet.
We have music nights here where we just drink a lot, me and my wife, and listen to music. And I can remember putting Schubert on, and then followed by Oscar Peterson. And she said, "What's this shit? Put a tune on, will you?" So we do that from time to time.
Well, I'm keen to hear what our viewers think about Taylor Swift, whether or not they are parents who take their kids to Taylor Swift, or people who go because they like it themselves. Rod and Zoe, thank you so much for joining Spectator TV.